Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest installment of Digging Deeper. Today's conversation is going to be really great. If you can, please make sure that your sound is muted so it does not affect the film when we show it here in a second. But first off, happy World Food Day. There's lots to celebrate in the food system. A lot of you being on this call are connected to the local food system in one way or another. But there's also a lot to challenge in the food system. And in today's conversation, we're talking specifically about land access and farmer transitions. For me, this is a very important topic in my own family. I'm a grew up on a third generation family farm, and we are trying to figure out what the next generation looks like. So I'm very personally excited to welcome Martha with Practical Farmers of Iowa for today's conversation. As we get started, please introduce yourself in the chat so Martha knows who is here, what organization that you are representing. For those who are new here in the space, we are Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Funders. If I can get my slides here to work. We are a national membership network of funders in philanthropy and impact investing who are invested in food and agriculture systems. This is a unique program of SAFSFs that anyone in the ecosystem can join. So some of you are with nonprofits, are farmers, or with PSOs, some of our funding partners and funding organizations. But this is a really casual environment to see aspects of digging in our documentary film. So feel free to be off camera, to eat lunch. No hard feelings. This is meant to be casual. Use the chat to ask any questions or to communicate with Martha, and we'll pull from the chat later on in the discussion. But first things first, we're going to do the film. So Maggie Mascarenas on our team is going to pull up the film. I'm going to stop sharing here. We have about 6 minutes of the film for those who have been a part of Digging Deeper in some capacity so far this series. This one will look a little different. We'll do about 6 minutes of the film, followed by a presentation and then Q&A. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maggie to share the film.
Land in America in particular plays a huge role in the accumulation of generational wealth. We know that those natives that were living here before the colonizers arrived, they did not have the same relationship with land as an individualistic tool for accumulating wealth. Those colonizers and their descendants, they really codified land as the basis of wealth. And that baseline, we can't really skip over the history of those who were advantaged in accumulating a lot of land. There were lots of legislation made during the New Deal era through the war periods that were made to make sure that there was a strong white middle class. Unfortunately, those same investments have never been made in other communities. We know that we're going to see a lot of transitioning in farmland. The average age of the farmer is increasing. It's in the 60s at this point. Yes, there's a next generation of farmers, and their biggest challenge right now is probably accessing land. We just as a country have to support them. Hola. Bueno, ¿cuánto tiempo que ya no venía? Hola, Berta. Masika Henson.
Cultivamos fresas, moras y vegetales, diferentes vegetales como jitomates, chiles, cebolla, repollos, son diferentes. Cuando yo vine a este país,
thought I'd sort of listen.
años, mi mamá trabajaba en la fresa, mi papá trabajaba en una nercería, empecé trabajando cortando fresa. Después mis padres consiguieron fresa, le nombran a medias cuando a uno no puede plantar todo y un agricultor dice, tú cortas la fresa, una caja para ti y otra para mí. Y así empezó mi padre. El hermano que es más chico que yo entró a la agricultura orgánica, se llama Francisco, y él me motivó a que yo fuera dueña de lo mío.
So a significant barrier to accessing land is access to credit. Anyone who's starting out in a business is going to face the challenge of capital, raising capital. But in particular, where there's a legacy and history of discrimination, accessing credit is an especially big burden for people of color.
El 2016 compramos este terreno con ayuda de FarmLink. Me financiaron, me ayudaron con los papeles.
How does it feel to own this land in the United States of America?
Es algo muy bonito que se siente llegar a ser dueño. Es algo muy, muy bonito. Yo les he aconsejado a mis estos compañeros que están en la agricultura que luchen por tener su propio terreno porque es una estabilidad la que logramos.
Access to unique financing made Bertha's American dream come true. But just as there's pride and hope in gaining land, there's the sting of losing it. So do you live near here now?
This is the house right here. This was my mom. She grew up here. My uncle. This is the prime piece of land that they love so much. What we're looking at here is around I want to say it's 396 acres. Unfortunately, we had to sell it, not getting any support from the USDA. They really didn't do any kind of help for us until we're already in foreclosure. The banks, you know, the bank that my family has been using for years and years and years, just seemed like they just kind of just turned their back, you know, pretty quick on us. I know if I know if I was a white farmer inheriting land and trying to bring back and take care of debt, I know I would get a lot more support than if I being a black farmer. Yeah, it does hurt. It does hurt.
Well, we know in these local offices, between the tax office and sometimes the local county USDA offices, there's often a network of folks who conspire to benefit their community's interests. And many times we've seen that manifest in African Americans and other communities of color having a disproportionate debt burden. So they're more susceptible to loss, to foreclosure, but also when there are folks that are within government institutions that can kind of take advantage of that power, they can make that discrimination look like it never occurred.
Latif every day walks out and sees the land that he had to sell. The land that was in his family for so many, generations, and now it's gone. It breaks my heart. This piece that he actually lives across the street from, he doesn't own and cannot grow anything on it anymore.
I feel really strongly that if we're not intentional about eliminating these barriers, that we're just going to continue to perpetuate a widening racial wealth equity gap.
We have Martha with Practical Farmers of Iowa. I've looked at the presentation. It is really, really great. It has lots of key points related to what you all just saw in Digging In. If you joined us late, welcome to Digging Deeper. Today is also World Food Day, so it's a bit of a celebration here at SAFSF. Please put any questions, comments, thoughts, ideas in the chat as we go throughout. We will ask them to Martha towards the end. But with that, I will turn it over to you, Martha.
Thank you, Holly. And I also just want to say thank you for such a beautiful film. I was able to watch the whole thing this week, and it just feels like such a wonderful summary of so many of the issues we face in sustainable ag. So I work for Practical Farmers of Iowa. If you can move the slide ahead. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a nonprofit that is located primarily in Iowa, and we do have some members in surrounding states. That was originally founded in the late 80s by a group of farmers who wanted to know if they could save money on nitrogen applications. And so they did some field trials, and that is sort of the roots of our organization. You can click the slide ahead again. So our organization today is about 6,000 members strong, and we still have a real focus on farmer-led education and farmer-led research. In very recent years, we have also started a farm viability department, which is focused on some of our cost share options for planting cover crops, for extending habitat opportunities, grazing infrastructure. And my role is also connected to farm viability, where we're really thinking more about one-on-one help and one-on-one support for our farm members. So my role at PFI is the Senior Farmland Viability Coordinator, which is kind of a mouthful, but I deal with all things related to land access, farm transitions, and new farmland tenancies. If people have questions about rental rates or they would like someone to help them create a lease. It's quite a new position at Practical Farmers of Iowa. It was started 2.5 years ago. We are ever evolving in ways that we can help and support beginning farmers. So a little background for me, I was a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa and still am for about 10 years before I took on this role as a staff member. I farm up in Northeast Iowa. I graze on a family farm. I have bison and I have cattle. Some of the pictures you see here are some of the things that I take really seriously too, which is the preservation of woods and native plants that we have in our woods and our pastures. But I also have about 80 acres of crop ground where I raise oats and hay for our livestock. And I also rent out parts of those acres through rotations to a corn and soybeans farmer. So this puts me in kind of a unique position because I rent the land from my family. So I am both a landowner and a tenant. But more importantly, and what I wanted to emphasize today is that there is no way that I would have ever been able to afford or access or have the opportunity to do what I do today if it weren't for that generational wealth. I'm a direct recipient of my grandmother's grandfather, who was a very wealthy farmer, and some of that land is still in our property today. So really recognizing that privilege was part of what led me to wanting to take on this job when I saw it open at Practical Farmers of Iowa. Consistently, we see that the #1 barrier for beginning farmers is land access. We see that at PFI with our member surveys, and also the National Young Farmers Coalition has identified that as the #1 barrier for beginning farmers. So this is a map across the United States looking at cropland value. Today, I'm going to be talking a lot about Iowa statistics, in part because that's my experience, but also because Iowa State University has tracked information about land and land access and land tenure and farmland ownership for the last 40 years. But I think you can see here across the map that the areas that are dark red are some of the most expensive farmland in the country. So we're not talking about land that's up for development. This is just acres that are going to be sold for farms. This is a 2023 statistic. But in 2022, Iowa was actually the 3rd highest rate in the nation. I think that that's interesting to note. Can you switch? It's interesting to note because when you look at the state of Iowa, our most productive farm ground is actually in the northern half of the state. So when we're talking about an average of $10,000 for just a bare acre of land, many farmers, that's an average. So many farmers across the state are looking at $14,000 to $17,000 per acre if they want to purchase land. So these are some statistics that we can dig in a little bit, some things that were mentioned a little bit in the movie. In 1982, about 30% of farmland was owned by people who were 65 years or older. And in 2022, which is the most recent statistic, it is well over half of farmers. I included the statistic here about 2017 as well, just so you can see how quickly that number is changing. So I want to dig in a little bit too as we think about and talk about land that is leased, because a huge percentage of Iowa farmland is leased, over 60% in 2022. Here, as you can see in the statistic, that represents about a 1 million acre increase in 5 years. But really tied to this is the idea that there is such a culture within farming that it is so important to leave farm to family members. Farmland is certainly being sold at rapid rates across Iowa and across the United States. But we also see so much land passed down through families. As someone who is, was born on a family farm, who has grown up with that same mantra, and now I'm working and find it so difficult to help beginning farmers purchase land and really have that security. I've had to unpack this a lot. And I think what it boils down to is a sense from those farmers that they want someone that they trust to take care of their land. I would just say, anecdotally growing up around here in a 5-mile radius, the land that gets sold, you'll see all the farm buildings and the home place torn down. What you'll see is really a lot of what they're referencing in the film, where farms are getting larger and larger and larger. I've also seen, just again in the 5 acres around here, 2 stands of 10 acres of trees that are cut down to be planting more field crops. And so part of the trends that we're seeing is that, we have these retiring farmers who know they want to do right by their kids, who also feel like it's really important to keep that land in the family. And a lot of times those kids that are inheriting land, they're living in the cities now. So we're getting a greater number and a greater numbers of people who own land who are not farming it. And a lot of time those kids, maybe in their 50s or 60s. This is a map nationally, and the dark blue areas that you see are the areas that have some of the highest rental rates across the country. You can switch again. And in that, this is just a map of Iowa and the rental rates within the state. $300 an acre is kind of average. So what this represents for those heirs who are not farming is either a fairly decent passive income, although typically it tends to be a supplemental income for those landowners. And if they're thinking about selling that land, if the land doesn't mean as much to them as it did to their mom or their dad, you're talking about, typically in Iowa, we'll see farms of 200 acres. So a 200-acre farm can either represent about $60,000 of passive income that they're receiving, or it can mean about $5 million if they sell that land. So the realities in all of this, as we talk about that aging population, is that we know we're on the precipice of a huge transition of land. It's a given that in the next 30 years, there's going to be land exchanging hands. And market value is representing a lot of money for those people who are no longer farming. But in this, the people who can afford to buy the land at those land auctions are the ones that already have it. So some of those numbers about land ownership and farmers getting older is also because there may be a son or a daughter who's also farming that land, but the person who can afford to purchase it is the one that already has 200 or 300 or 400 acres, so they can use that as collateral to make that loan to make that purchase. So more than anything in that, I really want to emphasize how much pressure that puts on farming operations, whether it then is the person who is renting that land for $300 an acre, or whether it's that person who is trying to make that loan payment to really extract as much profit as possible from every acre. So we are really talking about a system that is built to put profit over conservation practices. Ideally, a landowner is one who's going to be thinking about the long term of the operation. But some of that also takes knowing about farming practices, understanding about farming practices, and really thinking about that land as an investment. If you don't have someone there to navigate and help you understand the nuances of farming, and you've always lived in the city, that can be a really hard sell. So we know that land transition is imminent, as I was saying before. One of the things that is the most surprising for me in this role is we get a lot of inquiries from both landowners and seekers asking for help in one way or another. But the farmers and the landowner requests far out, like there are so many more than the land seekers that we're looking to help. In about 4 months' time, we had about 50 inquiries for land, questions about land access, questions about things in my role. And 44 of those 50 inquiries were from landowners or retiring farmers who really wanted to connect with a beginning farmer. Some of that may not be a surprise given the members of our network. We are an organization that is really focused on regenerative ag practices. And you can go ahead and switch. And so, you know, a lot of the landowners and the retiring farmers who are in our membership are people who really already have a lot of care for that land, really put environmental stewardship at the forefront. All, I think, but 2 of those landowner and retiring farmer inquiries listed that regenerative ag practices and finding someone who thinks like them as a goal in that process. We also see a lot of farmers who are interested in moving beyond that corn and soybeans and even beyond that like extended rotation to really wanting to see food grown on their farm or bring livestock back on the land. So that's the good news. You know, this idea that we can make land matches between landowners and retiring farmers, I think is a really exciting opportunity that we have here at Practical Farmers of Iowa. You can switch. However, it is also so much more challenging than I ever would have guessed as I started this role. Because our 6,000 members across the state of Iowa mean that they're not typically neighbors or not someone just next door. So the challenges related to land access are really finding those matches where it is the right beginning farmer at the right place, it's the right enterprise, and it's for the right price. I'm going to give you a couple scenarios here just to illustrate that. Early on, when I started working for PFI, this was a scenario that came up. A farmer had passed away. His kids were really invested and interested in getting those acres to be farmed regeneratively. In Iowa, we typically say, you know, if a farmer really wants to make it, you need to have 1,000 acres. So that 800 mark is pretty powerful compared to a lot of our members. You know, a lot of landowners, I think the typical number is like around 200 to 300 acres. So it seems like a wonderful deal. Even more wonderful, there is a house that is available because so often that is the next question is where's that beginning farmer going to live? And in this case, these people really wanted to do a crop share. So that meant it wasn't someone who would have to front the money. So you know, at first blush, this seems like a wonderful opportunity for someone. But when you start to think about the realities of commodity crop farming, you're talking about a farmer who needs to have at least $100,000 worth of equipment and money to invest or loans to be able to take out to buy seed, to buy inputs, to get started. The way that things work is usually if there's an aspiring farmer and they might be ready to move. But when you're talking about someone who has the experience to farm and the equipment to farm, they're more than likely already well established in an area. And so then the question becomes the right place at the right time. In this case, we have a situation where we did have a farmer, a beginning farmer, who was located right next to some land for sale, who had the experience, who had the equipment. He was farming with his father-in-law, and he had been renting these acres from some landowners, and they really shared those values, those regenerative values. They were raising small grains. They were planting cover crops. He was in no-till. But the landowners decided that they really needed to sell, and they really needed to sell for market value. And so now we're looking at a tenant who has no land of his own, who needs to come up with about 1.6 million to get started. So he's going to maybe rely on his father-in-law if his father-in-law can make those loans. But in this, finding a banker who is willing to loan that money is really challenging. And this brings up another really important issue in the area of land access, and that is market value and what land is selling for right now versus production value, which is how much a farmer can actually make on those acres. And then our final example is a little smaller scale. A lot of the beginning farmers that we work with are thinking smaller scale, are thinking about food production, whether that is grazers or whether that is horticulture farmers who are growing vegetables or permaculture. You know, it becomes a lot more doable to think about affording a 40-acre parcel or a 10-acre parcel. And 10 acres will be a lot for a veggie farmer. So I was able to connect with a landowner near Des Moines, which is also magnificent, because I have some other landowners who are interested in getting horticulture farms started in central Iowa or in southwest Iowa. But there, you know, if you're talking about more than an hour from market, it really gets challenging. This landowner is getting about $300 per acre for that land in conventional row crops. And they want to do something. They know they want to help a beginning farmer. They reach out to me. Well, you know, as soon as we start getting into the conversation, a bare acreage is going to need some water lines or a well. It's going to need electric put in, and that farmer is going to need a pack shed and a cooler. So now we're looking at $15,000 to $20,000 at least just to get a hort farmer started. It's crazy to expect a tenant who has no guarantee of long-term tenure or being able to purchase that land to be able to front that money. But at the same time, you have a landowner who all of a sudden, you know, thinks, oh, sure, I have land, let's do this. But are they willing to make that $20,000 or $30,000 investment? When we go back to this idea of generational wealth and the idea of privilege, of course, absolutely, I feel like any landowner should be willing to put that forward. But the truth is that it can be really challenging and kind of feel overwhelming for those landowners who have the expectations of what they get and what they can afford and what they can't. And my messaging with all of that is not the should be or shouldn't be, but really recognizing that we have to meet people where they're at if we want to see changes and we want to see transformation. And so this is an area where we can think about barriers and ways that we can solve those barriers to get beginning farmers on the land. So this is just a summary of some of those challenges with those landowners. This is where I really appreciate the approach of being able to do some coaching and some one-on-one consulting with Practical Farmers of Iowa. Because, you know, there are a lot of land link sites that have been created over the years to help connect landowners and beginning farmers. PFI started one in 2014. But in that, we also recognized that there is a real need to talk landowners and land seekers through the process to really help them understand the challenges involved from the other side. And of course, once we find a successful match, once we get through all of those barriers and we find a beginning farmer, an aspiring farmer, and a retiring farmer, you know, I'm thinking right now of a couple of retiring farmers I have who don't care about the money. They just want to see their legacy continue. You know, we are really talking about being able to find an aspiring farmer who isn't already set up, who already is like growing their business and can't move. So if we bring a beginning farmer in, it's a match between two people who aren't family members, who are strangers, who are really going to need help in communicating their needs and really making sure that everybody's being taken care of in that process. So, Practical Farmers of Iowa, some of our approaches at PFI are related to that farmer-led education. We do conference sessions, we do webinars to help ground the general membership in and educate them in areas that can help prepare them for these kinds of transitions. We also have a labor for learning program, and this is an apprenticeship, so to speak, where we have farmers who are trainers and aspiring farmers who can go work on their land. And really, we're starting to look at this and think about this as a place where we can potentially match those aspiring farmers with these retiring farmers who are reaching out to us. So this can be kind of a nice testing ground to see if they're ready to then at the end of the summer sign a lease or commit to something a little bit more long-term. We also have a savings incentive program where we can help beginning farmers by matching their savings to be able to buy equipment. And our produce safety cost share is similar in terms of being able to buy equipment, and that is focused on horticulture farmers. For myself and the work that I do in land access, you've kind of heard about a lot of the things that I'm doing. I'm just in the process of this conversation. But I also would like to highlight our farmland access navigators. They are PFI members who are contracted through PFI to help support those land seekers along the way. They coach them on land readiness, on identifying goals and next steps and strategies to find land and to make those matches. And that is really born of a program that Renewing the Countryside out of Minnesota started several years ago. Of course, we talked a little bit about matching. We talked a little bit about the mediation support. And then finally, we have a small but modest fund where we are trying to support lease reviews or opportunities to get the farmer and the aspiring farmer together with a lawyer or a tax accountant to be able to hear all sides and to start to suss out how they might be able to make a land match happen. These are some additional challenges that I think feel much bigger than any grant will ever be able to provide. Housing. If I were a fairy godmother, anytime you're talking about a land match, anytime you're talking about a beginning farmer trying to get started on the land, they really need their house to be there or to be close. You put this extra burden on that farmer if they have to drive a half an hour to get to where they need to do the weeding or to do the harvest. Employment and health insurance kind of goes along with that idea of labor for learning, where we're offering $1,000 for a summer, which can help that retiring farmer supplement pay for that aspiring farmer. But most retiring farmers have not even put in very much money towards retirement. And certainly if they had the money for an employee, they would have done that years ago, and that employee would probably be taking over. So I wish that there was some kind of way that we could find those funds to bring those together, because that idea of an employee is like the testing ground to help everyone feel comfortable before they're ready to sign a long-term lease. And then, of course, financing for those land purchases, for those stories where we know that the bank might not provide a loan. And more opportunities for buy, protect, sell options, which is really looking at protecting and preserving farmland and also making land more affordable for those purchases while still providing that retirement income for those retiring farmers. And that is all I have, so we can open it up for questions from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martha. I have a few questions that I have received, but everyone on the line, if you have questions too, please put them in the chat and we'll go from there. But one of the first questions that I received was at the very beginning, you were talking about the different farmer-led aspects of PFI.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been a situation in recent history where farmers have wanted one thing or expressed an interest in one thing, and maybe the mainstream idea or what was popular at the moment was in opposition to what farmers were telling you?
Oh, that's a great question. I can't say that I have had those experiences at PFI, but I think that I have the good fortune to be working with staff members, and the culture at PFI is just always really talking about farmer members first. And that idea, that's why I was a member at PFI. As a farmer, I felt like the staff was really, I'm not trying to plug PFI here when I say that, but this is just the reality, that I think we're fortunate to have a culture that isn't trying to push an agenda, but really listen to what's new and cool and farmers are excited about, and give them opportunities for those annual conference sessions and field days.
This goes slightly with my next question. We do have quite a few funders on the line right now. What would you say to encourage funders to listen to farmers? Are there certain avenues or approaches that have worked for PFI that you would recommend, or on the opposite, like things you have tried that farmers have not resonated with? How can funders better listen to farmers?
Yeah, I think any opportunity you get to just put a farmer in front of you and hear their stories, you start to make connections, or you start to have ideas. The idea of employment as or using labor for learning as an opportunity to make matches was only born from talking to retiring farmers and hearing that they needed, you're hearing what they needed. They needed someone to come onto their land, but they didn't quite trust the idea of well, I just met this person, or I just found them on this land link site, and now I'm going to sign a year contract, and what's going to happen? So then you start to come up with ideas based just on what everybody is saying.
Awesome. Another question that came in is that you had mentioned keeping farms in the family. You talked a little bit about generational wealth. If keeping a farm in the family is not an option, you mentioned some things like retiring farmers partner with beginning farmers. How, I guess at what point, if people don't know, if they're in a family situation where there is a family farm and people do not want to take it over, how do you kind of expose farmers to the other options that do exist? Some of these are so new that people are I didn't even know that there was a program to pair retiring farmers with beginning farmers. How do you broach that conversation, especially with something that's so, and can be very emotionally charged?
Right. Well, I think this is where the idea that it's more than just finding a land link site, or, sometimes, I would say, especially, when we're looking at writing grants and figure things out, scale is so important, right? And so with scale, what can we do? We can do a land link site, and we can get 250 or 300 people a day on that site, and then we're going to have bigger impact. And the harsh reality to this is I think that those one-on-one conversations to help people unpack, or cohorts of 30 farmers to be able to talk to each other, in our farm transition groups, to help them really unpack their feelings and reflect on things, is really an essential part of the process. Because it's not just an idea that you might say, oh yeah, I want to do that. It's a lot deeper than that. It's a lot more about questioning the value sets that we've always had and the things that we've always been told, to start to have to move and change. So much of this film, and what I love, is it's really about questioning what we think of as just our realities, right? It's questioning the norm in a way that presents an idea that we could really make changes.
Great. I am also going to let everybody know, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Some of you are messaging me directly, which is great, but we do have time for one more question outside of the question that I'm getting ready to ask. This is a two-parter, so I'm going to ask you the first part, then the second part. Practical Farmers of Iowa is very Iowa-based. What is something that, the question is basically what is something that you've learned that's very Iowa specific that you would be this works in Iowa, but I don't know if it would work in another state or another.
Ooh, great question.
Opposite, what has worked in Iowa that you're other people should try, that would have more of a regional implication?
I don't know if this is Iowa specific, but it's PFI specific, that we have the good fortune right now to have this 6,000 member network, right? So with very, very limited promotion, I think there have been one or two mentions in newsletters. I can't keep up with these requests, right? And I feel really lucky with that. So I think that your challenges would really be getting those farmers together in the first place. But there's so much to be said about the power of a network. And I think we see that over and over again in different scenarios. I belong as a farmer. I belong to an organization called Climate Land Leaders, and we were just at a retreat together. And there was no agenda on that retreat. We were just all hanging out together and like talking about what we were doing. And by the end of that, I already have like 6 or 7 or 8 ideas that I really want to try. And similarly in the bison world, you know, I get together with the Minnesota Bison Association because there are not enough bison producers in Iowa for an association. Anyway, we get together and there are 200 bison producers in the room. And so there's like synergy there. So I think being able to bring those like-minded together is really the start. And if you don't have that, then that can be really challenging.
We have a question from Phoebe in the chat. Have you worked much with immigrant community folks looking for land?
Great question. Yes. So yes. A couple of different organizations and attempts we've made at funding within Iowa. We have some incubator farms that are specific to immigrant populations. And one of the visions at PFI that we would love to one day get funded, we didn't get it in our last round, is to be able to extend a navigator into those incubator farms, so that we really are using someone within the community who can spread the word and give support within that community. We also worked fairly closely with one of those incubator farms, Global Grains out of Des Moines. And a lot of I was just talking to our annual conference planner, and we just do a lot of one-on-ones. It's really about networking within our organizations to try to support them.
Great. Okay, I have one more question for you, unless anyone frantically types a question. Last question is for funders on the line. We may know of farmers, know farming organizations that are connected to farmers. We may know a farmer that could benefit from resources provided from PFI. So what are the requirements for a farmer to become a member, and how can we connect them best with you?
Great. So for starters, I want to emphasize that all of our field days at Practical Farmers of Iowa are open to anyone. You don't have to be a member to come in and to join. You don't need to be a member to like receive our services. But membership is $50 or $60 a year. And if you maybe just want to drop www.practicalfarmers.org in the chat, that is our website. And you can find out more about us there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Martha and Practical Farmers of Iowa, for joining us today and for continuing our conversations as part of the Digging Deeper series. I think this was a really great conversation for World Food Day. Land issues are such an important part of all the things that we are doing in the food system. And I just really appreciated the examples that you gave. I think there's really clear takeaways from this for funders and non-funders in the room. But with that, everyone have a great rest of your World Food Day. We have more of these Digging Deeper series coming up. Feel free to register and share those, and then we'll follow up with some more information from Martha, as well as more information about the film. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.